although later in the questions, I might be freer in what I say. So that's we'll just share the slides and then I'll get going. You can stop me at any time if you want, but I mean, and just unmute yourselves because I'm not sure I will be able to see you if you just raise your hands. But we will also have time for questions at the end. So you decide when you want to stop me or to ask questions. Okay, so that's the general overview. I've already introduced myself. By the way, we are here together with David Schindler, who was also present in the meeting that we did at the European Congress at Bocconi, and he's younger, so he knows a lot more about the job market than I do, because he's lived it more recently, and he's also been in charge of recruiting at his institution, so he has a wealth of knowledge that is more updated than mine. And he will be also present during the question time. Okay, there I go. General overview. What I'm going to talk about first, brief introduction of what it is, and then a bit more kind of practical in terms of what's the timeline, the differences and similarities between the European job market for economists and the US job markets. How do employers select? Where should you apply? Two-body problems, and a bit of, in that case, again, evidence-based recommendations on how to stay healthy and sane, and then finally, platforms through which one can apply. Okay, so in terms of what is the job market, one thing that not everyone in the profession knows is that it's a quite unique social science institution. It exists in economics. It also exists in political science in the same organized way as in economics, although it takes place at different point in time. In fact, I think literally this week they are having the job market for political scientists and other disciplines, but not many. So I have a physics co-author that says that he doesn't like a lot at all the economics publication culture. He says it's crazy, and we are to still submit to it. But he says that our job market is actually cool. So it's the one thing you can boast as an economist is that we have a job market that actually works pretty well for us. So it's really a centralized system to place PhDs in economics. And we know because there is a survey in the US, there's a survey of earned doctorates that the National Science Foundation conducts. We know how many economists are produced with PhDs in the US over time. You have the data here, the left panel, this panel on the left, it's basically some statistics on how many people get PhDs in the US. It is data until 2015, I think, or 2012, something like that. The references for all the data that I have are at the end, and we're going to share the slides so you can see them. But essentially, you see that's pretty stable around basically 1,000 PhD economists in the US in these years. Interestingly, the proportion, what does change a lot is the proportion of US citizens, in particular, even male US citizens who get PhDs has increased a lot, has decreased a lot. It was, 76 for males, US citizens, it goes down to 25. Female US citizens has increased a bit, but not that much, although it has doubled in proportional terms. But then there's been a really big increase in male specifically, but also female, non-US citizens. That's on the right-hand side. We have job listings for the number of listed jobs this is data from Job Opportunities for Economists. So some of the papers are a little bit old, but I don't think they have changed that much. So these are listings and jobs. So listings is because a university can list more than one position. So jobs is number of total positions advertised, and then both for academic and non-academic positions. You see that there's been an increase over time. Now, the reason for this is that even though the production of PhDs in the US hasn't changed that much, it has increased a lot in other places, and many institutions that didn't list positions in previous times, they do list now. So the possibility of having 4,000 positions for PhDs reflects the fact that many non-US institutions advertise in job opportunities for economists. So, but that gives you an idea of the order of magnitude of the market we're talking about. Okay, so here is, again, employment outcomes. So the top table is not very useful in terms of the proportion of people hired, because we don't capture everyone. But yes, in terms of the ones that end up, the relative numbers of those that end up in academia, business industry, government, and so on. So that's gives you some rough idea. Data is a little bit outdated. I suspect now there are more people in business industry than there used to be, but at least it gives you some rough numbers of what it is. Perhaps more useful for you at this point in time is the bottom panel, which talks about how many applications people on average do, how many interviews, flyouts, and job offers. What's interesting about this is that 107 is the average number of applications. For most of you, I would not recommend such a low number. Remember, this incorporates everyone. There may be people who know very well, they have very strong limitations in terms of where they want to apply, in terms of location and so on, or they may be that they already know that they have a job, so they don't have so many applications. But I think in general, it's advisable to have more. But in terms of the number, this gives you an idea of what people are doing. Now, what's interesting about this is you see of the applications, how many result in interviews? So about 20%. So 1 in 5, more or less, ends up in interviews. That's an average number, could be lower or higher, obviously. From those that get interviews, from the interviews, the mean number of interviews for people in the job market is 16.8. Of those, about a third result in flyouts, and from the flyouts, about half result in offers, more or less. Now, this is a distribution that is extremely skewed. So there's a lot of people on the right tails that have a really large number of interviews and flyouts. So I think these are means. I think the medians would probably be quite lower. But I didn't see the data, so I'm not entirely sure. But I would say that these numbers, these 30% and 50%, are for the mean, but the median would probably be lower. Okay. So those are some numbers about this. In terms of the timeline, the job market starts in sometime in October, November. I think the first deadlines for the students I'm looking at now is about mid-October, although there's some earlier deadlines. So the postdoc, that the famous postdoc position that Nuffield College offers in Oxford, has a deadline at the end of this month. But you know, I think the earlier deadlines I've seen is mid-October, more like end of October and November. That's when you need your paper to be uploaded to one of the web pages we're going to talk about. By the end of November and early December is when interviews are scheduled by the departments, and that's kind of general. Most universities are going to be that way. Then after the period where you do the package and you have your interview scheduled, the first thing that kind of final thing that happens is the interviews and flyouts. Interviews would be in mid-December for the European job market for economists, and early January for the US job market. Now, these are recommended dates now because they are mostly online. I think almost all will be online, I think, this year. Other years, maybe next year will be different. So if you're not applying this year, but next year, there is no guarantee that next year the interviews will be online. They might be in person, but we'll have to see about this. Maybe we can talk about this in the discussion. But now this year, mostly, you know, mid-December, I think it's 13th, 14th of December for the European job market for economists. That way, those are the recommended dates, because then if you want, you can go to the winter meetings of the Econometric Society, which are in Berlin this year. And then early January, but again, the American Economic Association is recommended interviews before the in-person meetings in New Orleans, which are ASA. So I think it's something like a 2nd or 3rd or something like this of January. Finally, after all this process, you know, you will have a few interviews, as I showed you, and they're going to be from mid-January to early March. Now, I mean, flyouts to universities where you will give a talk, talk to professors, and you'll have a day-long, typically day-long stay where you will be interact with your potential future colleagues. Now, if you're not a US citizen and not an EU based, so there are many countries, so we have students often coming from Latin America or Asia that need a visa to go to the US, you should have applied now. If not, apply immediately, because consulates in many places in the for the US, they're taking a very long time to process a visa. So if you perhaps planned for a flight in the US and you're not a European citizen, probably you need to think about the visa things right away. Now, after all this, usually between sometime in March, hopefully maybe earlier, February to March is when you start getting offers to, go work someplace. There's also what is called the scramble. So some universities don't get any of the candidates they flew out to accept their offers, at least not the ones that they liked. And some candidates don't have offers by that time. So at that time, there's what we call the scramble, in which, some universities try to contact. It's a bit less centralized, more decentralized. You write to advisors, students, and students advisors write to universities in case there's a possible match that has been missed. So there's still activity in all that period in terms of matching. And finally, there might be job markets that activate later. So some universities in the UK don't go through any of the two job markets are centralized that I mentioned, and they advertise in other places and at different times, and they might have interviews at different times. I've been in interviews in at least two universities in the UK in July. So, so this means that they might advertise later. So if you are unlucky, and I hope you're not, but if you're unlucky, don't lose faith, because there will be possibilities later on. Okay, now there are two, as I mentioned, there are two job markets, and the European one, the European job market for economists, and the US. So why is that? Well, up to 2018, there was the American job market. So the Allied Social Sciences Conference had a job market where there were interviews conducted. And there were also the Spanish Economic Association and the Royal Economic Society in the UK. They have their separate centralized interviews for universities that didn't want to go, let's say, to New Orleans or to San Francisco or to New York to interviews. It's very expensive, and they didn't want to do it. They didn't have the budget or anything. So these two associations organized markets. But some institutions, both in the European Union and in other places, were in neither of these markets, neither the American, neither the Spanish, nor the UK market. So the European Economic Association decided in 2018 to join forces with the UK and then the Spanish association, and fold into a unique European-based job market for economists. There were two that were held in person in Naples 2018 and Rotterdam 2019, and there's been two online ones since then. So we've had four instances of these job markets. Now, why we decided to do this? There were two. One is to get European candidates more visibility, and then to allow non-European markets to show more interest in Europe. So if you fly from the US to Rotterdam or Naples, you're showing that you're very serious about the European job market. Also, it's cheaper for the European institutions to fly to Naples, interview in Naples. You're not jet lagged when you do it. So many people found that this was a better way of conducting the market than flying all the way to the US. So the main difference between the two is that interviews in the European job market takes place in December, and the interviews in the US is in early January, but otherwise they function very similarly. The flyouts are at the same time, the offers as well are at the same time. One special mention for the offers, we are making the recommendation, and so is the American Economic Association, of not making offers to the PhD students that are in the market that have either a very short deadline or have a deadline that is very early in the market. There is a problem that the market might unravel in this case, and that creates problems. And it's also very, very stressful for candidates. So we've recommended to avoid this if at all possible. Okay, so those are the practicalities. Let's say now you will be interested on how do employers select. So let me give you the facts first, and then maybe there's some policy implications that arise from the facts. So the fact is, an average good department will receive on the order of 600 applications. Even a not so good department is going to receive other, large number, maybe not 600, but they might receive 300, 200, 400. So large numbers. So that's important that you keep in mind, because you will be selected for interviews potentially from that pool. Now, the first phase is quite homogeneous in the sense that usually a paper is looked at by either one or two professors. Depends on how many people are in the department, but there will be a couple of people that look at the package, not the paper, but the whole package. Paper, letters of reference, and so on. Now, papers usually are assigned by broad area. In most places, you will have a subcommittee or a few people that look at micro theory papers, a group of people that looks at macro papers, a group that looks at applied papers, and maybe in some cases even a econometric theory subcommittee. Now, a good department usually will have on the order of 30 to 40 active researchers, let's put it this way. Of course, there are smaller, there are bigger, but that's kind of a representative number, I would say, which means that they need on the order of 600 to 1,200 refereeing. So this means that a professor will evaluate anywhere between 10 to 30 candidates. So that's should give you an idea of what's the kind of numbers that everyone will have in mind. Often, people request particular files. Let's say, we're not in a conference today, but let's say we were in Bocconi in the Congress, and I met one of you or saw your seminar, and then I think this person is really good. I want to evaluate this person. So that's something that can and does happen quite a bit. The times for interviews are about up to 3 days, which means that institutions will have between 10 and 30 interviews, between approximately 10 a day, more or less. So one in every 20 or 30 candidates of those that sent applications are chosen for interviewing. Okay, now after this phase, where people read the applications, there's a short listing, and that varies a bit by departments. Whereas the process of looking at the candidates is very similar, the short listing varies a bit. Some departments will ask all referees to evaluate their papers either numerically or quantitatively, perhaps both. And then a subcommittee narrows down who are the people chosen for the interviews. In other departments, fields or subfields have a quota of interviews, and the field either via a subcommittee or in its entirety proposes candidates and perhaps even has a final say. That varies a little bit, but there will be some group of people that selects out of the total list, incorporating the valuations of everyone else. Okay, now, given what I just said about the first phase, I think I don't have very good data for this, but this is my opinion of what happens. In order to go from the first, from the application to getting an interview, you need a field expert to like your work. That's really essential, because those are the ones that are going to be making the decision. So the paper, the way you write it, the way the letters are written, they somehow need to convince someone in your field to like your work. But the field is broad, meaning you may be a development person and you get a labor person to review it. Or you're a behavioral theorist and your work is read by a social choice theorist. So you need to write your paper with that kind of refereeing in work, at least for this time. Maybe not once you submit, it might be different, but at this time, you need to make it appealing to a broad person. Now, this second implication comes from the fact that there are so many papers that people are looking at files, they may be bored. So you need to somehow draw the attention of the referee, which means that it needs to be different in some dimension. It needs to be obvious that you're doing something that is out of the ordinary. On the other hand, it cannot be weird. So there's a sweet spot in there between doing something original and doing something so, original that no one understands. Okay. And, I know this is it's easier to say than, than to actually effect, but that's what you need, really. Senior people usually have more influence in hiring decisions, and their preferences may be systematically different. For example, there are more old people like myself that are theorists or theoretical econometricians. So you have to be careful that, just to give you a very, very silly example, but not non-trivial. I think that right now, most people believe, and I think there's good reason to believe that linear probability model, for many cases, if you got good identification, is as good as a probit or a logit. An older person might disagree with you. They've been trained into a different world and they might have not seen the modern advances and so on. So, you have to somehow have an idea of how older people read papers, because they may be more influential. So you better not to insult them or say, theory is irrelevant, I'm not having any theory. That kind of thing. Be careful with that. Okay. So one question I got posed is where to apply. My answer is everywhere, or almost everywhere. I hope you do well. I think it's likely you do well, but there is no guarantee. So at least you keep your options open. Right now, these days, application is not very difficult. You also may say, yeah, I don't want to live in, state X in the US because whatever. Well, you may find if you visit that the prejudice about the place are not true, and you may change your minds. There's a chance that you change your mind. So there is an option value of waiting to decide when you have a possibility. And also, because multiple offers are really the only way to improve conditions. So why not get multiple offers just in case? Okay. So only avoid places where there's zero chance that you will go. Okay. Two-body problems. They are problems. That's the reason they are called problems. But first of all, this is very important. In most places, questions about partners are illegal. And in any case, they are not okay. So you can avoid them. In my book, it's even okay to lie, because they're putting you in a spot, and there's enough moral wiggle room there to say, okay, they're doing something stupid, so I'm okay with just lying to them. So they're illegal. I don't think they're moral. So, but even if they don't ask, you can sometimes volunteer the information. Now, that's not always a good strategy. So first of all, it would be useful to figure out if the job market of the place is good from secondary sources, in the sense that if you want a partner and a partner wants to go to work if there's a particular place, then it may be that the job market is very active. Your partner might not be an economist. Maybe he or she is a real doctor, a medical doctor, and then you want to figure out whether they can practice, whether the licensing works in that place. So just try to figure it out. Don't ask directly, or not necessarily, whether they have good chances to work in there. Now, if you are two economists looking for jobs, two PhD economists, now figure out if the department can hire two. And that's useful. You can look at the ads, and sometimes they say. And the reason I'm saying this is, for some places, it might be the only option to get some really good people, and they will use that option. And this can work out well for you, because you get two positions, and then you're together, and that's very good. If partner is not an economist, other departments can help, but not necessarily often. Okay, so real problems, sometimes it can work in your advantage because you can find jobs. Now, here one caveat, this is your personal decision, and sometimes you may get, and I've seen it on occasion, and that bothers me a little bit, where two people get offer from a nice place, maybe not the best place, and one of the members of this two-body problem gets an offer from perhaps a little bit better place. And then they get a lot of pressure from, colleagues, advisors, and so on. Just, figure your preferences and decide with your preferences. It's not admissible, just to, you can listen to advice, of course, from others, but you might decide, okay, I know it's a slightly better place, but we're going to be happier there, so why not? And I'm saying this in part because it was, in my case, I had full support from my advisors and colleagues, but when I went to Barcelona, my first job at Pompeu Fabra, I had offers from the US that in some sense were better. Pompeu Fabra was a new institution at the time. They had some good people, but who knows, it's kind of, there was more variance in there. But my partner at the, wouldn't have a job in the US. She had waited a few years to start her career because of of being in the US with me. And then I wasn't prepared to actually have her wait even more years for her to get a green card or get a job. So I say, okay, fine, we go to Barcelona, you can get a job. Turned out to be a really good choice. And, I was lucky that my advisor was supportive, not always the case. So just think for yourself. So sorry for the detour, but I thought it was important. Okay. Okay. So staying healthy and sane. One important thing there is to keep your perspective. The market is not quite a meritocracy. There is definitely a lot of noise. Some people that are very good don't get jobs, and then they eventually get them later, and they are able to shine. So don't take it personally. Don't think that the signal in the market is so good that you should get discouraged from a bad outcome. It's quite possible that actually it's just a mistake and just noise. So keep that perspective in mind. Also, all jobs are okay. You're not a failure because you end up working in an institution that is lower ranked than yours, or you don't end up working in academia. All jobs are fine. You're looking for a place to thrive. That's really important because people sometimes get stressed for the wrong reasons, and then when they end up going to that other place that didn't look okay, they end up being very, very happy. So just keep that perspective, please. And as I said before, it's your job, your preference, perhaps your partner's preference, and those are the only ones that matter. Others, you can take advice, fine, it's information, but your preferences make the final decision. Now, something for which evidence is very important. Sleep, eat, and exercise makes you happy and more productive. There are not shortcuts for that. Don't stay up long nights because you want to do the last comma and make sure that the presentation is great just before a seminar or an interview. Maybe your presentation is better, but at the end of the day, they are judging you. So it's better that there is a typo in your presentation and you have slept well than the other way around. Because, people take for granted that there are no typos, but if you perform badly in the seminar, it's a disaster. And there's a huge amount of literature. I put a few references at the end saying that all these things that I mentioned, sleep, eat, exercise, make you happy, more productive, more likely to get a good job. If that means the presentation is not as sleek, that's fine. Now, if you feel badly, really badly, please seek help. You're not alone. I'm sure there are tons of people around you that are willing to help. And most universities have mental health specialists that can help you out. Don't try to do everything on your own. Now, another piece of advice that could be useful is sometimes, especially at the time when you're waiting for calls, for interviews, or for flyouts, you will be very stressed because you could do finishing either your job market paper, improving it even more, or finishing other projects that you need to finish your dissertation as a diversion, so your mind keeps occupied in something else, because refreshing email every 20 seconds does not cause. So there's, on this, there is very good evidence. Refreshing email does not make more offers to apply. Okay, so here I write a few sources for information. You probably know already Econ Job Market, but you probably need to upload your papers, the job opportunities for economists for the American Economic Association. The European Job Market for Economists has a candidate directory that gives you visibility. That's not how you transmit your material, but it's useful for visibility. Inomics is another website which has offers that might be useful. Business schools have a platform called Acadius, and for many of you, you might find jobs. I have several co-authors that found jobs through this. And there are others, because as I say, some places want you to apply directly through their systems and they advertise only kind of more locally. So if there are places that you might find interesting, but you don't see advertised, then you should go and visit their websites. Okay, here are the references. You know, we'll make this you know, public later. The process you're embarking can be frustrating, but it's very nice in many ways. After you go to the market for a few years, you will not get this amount of attention. There won't be many people willing to read your papers, give you feedback, and so on, which means that if you concentrate on the activity, on you know, having conversations with very smart people, getting feedback on your work with very smart people in many places in the world, and so on, I think you're more likely to be happy than if you concentrate, they're evaluating my work and they might not think that I'm good enough. Okay, so yeah, be ready to explore new ideas, build coalitions. Maybe you find co-authors in your trips. They may not give you a job. You may find a co-author. I don't know. In some ways, a co-author might be more valuable. A good co-author might be more valuable than an offer. Okay, so that's it. I think I'm going to stop sharing. I see that there are already some questions in there, but maybe David has answered.